She's on her way, and she comes to New Orleans, but she comes 2 weeks early for reasons that are detailed in her book, me and Lee. And Ochsner's out of town, and Mary Sherman's out of town, and all of a sudden they realize that she calls Ochsner's office and says, I'm here, Mr. DeMille, ready for my close-up, And they said, we got to get somebody in there and get a hold of her, because she's going to go around town shooting off her mouth, and we can't have Ochsner's name in the middle of this. So they scramble a intelligence agent, a bodyguard, to get to New Orleans quickly, the last week of April, and get a hold of her, and hang on to her, and get her a place to live, and get her set up in her cover job and all that stuff, because we're expecting her in the second week of April. And this guy that they send in, who meets her within 24 hours of being in town, the next 24 hours introduces her to David Ferry, and next 24 hours introduces her to Mary Sherman. This guy's name is Lee Harvey Oswald.
Now, do you have independent confirmation of that outside of Judy?
What, the memos? I mean, you can look at the trail on it, the dates and everything else. You got to look at the trail on this, but nobody. This thing is super. This is a Medical Manhattan Project. There's not a paper trail on it.
Okay.
You either look at the history of it and look at the pieces, and we've got lots of pieces there, but he introduces her to Ferry in 24 hours, and she goes over. She meets Jack Martin. She is in and out of Ferry's apartment. She gets her. What we have is she gets her job at the Riley Coffee Company. May I assume you know that Lee Oswald worked at the Riley Coffee Company?
No, I did not know that until I started listening to some of your shows in the past couple of days.
Okay. Well, the Riley Coffee Company imports coffee from Latin America. Lee Oswald starts working on on May 10th, 1963. Judy Very starts working there on May 10th, 1963. They start on the same day. They're referred by the same employment agency. The guy that handles their background checks is a former FBI agent by the name of Bill Moynihan. And when Kennedy's killed, it's Moynihan that prepares Oswald's documents for the FBI. But the thing is that the Riley Coffee Company is owned by the Riley family, okay? But they have this little division of it called Standard Coffee, which is mostly retail sales. But Moynihan is the president of Standard Coffee Company, and he's the executive vice president of Riley Coffee. Okay. Now, very few people know this, but Lee Oswald, that first week, didn't start working for Riley. He started working for Standard, and Judy worked for Standard. So on May 10th, both Lee Oswald and Judy Baker are hired by the Standard Coffee Company. And then 1 week later, Lee is transferred over to Riley. Now, what's interesting about this, Standard doesn't have any reason for a coffee grinder. All their coffee is ground by the Riley Coffee Company. So why is Oswald going through Standard Coffee? It's so Moynihan can handle the background checks, because there's two words they don't want to find. They don't want to find the word Russia in Lee Oswald's background, and they don't want to find the word cancer in Judith Very's background. And so that's when it starts. And Judy actually works for Moynihan. And Lee's sneaking out all the time. Judy's covering his time cards. So is Moynihan. When Moynihan's there, he initials them. When Moynihan is not there, Judy initials them. Okay, so we have Lee Oswald's time cards from the Riley Coffee Company with Judy's initials on them, approving them, despite the fact that Oswald was gone most of the time. And so they're covering him. He's being worked out of Guy Bannister's office. But more importantly, several days a week, starting in about Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Lee and Judy would sneak out and go over to David Ferry's apartment and work on the biological weapon. And oh, by the way, Lee gets Judy helps her find an apartment on Marengo Street, right off of Magazine Street. Well, Lee lives on Magazine Street, so in the morning he gets on the Magazine Street bus. It goes down. Judy gets on the same bus around Marengo Street or Constantinople, and then they go down, and the bus stops in front of the Riley Coffee Company, and they get off. All right, so we've got this, daily contact between Lee Oswald and Judith Ferry Baker. We also know about Oswald visiting Dutz Moret, however you want to say it, who's his uncle, who works with Carlos Marcello. And we've got, witnesses who double dated with Judy and Lee, even though, Lee was married, but his wife wasn't there most of the time. And when she was there, she was at home taking care of the babies, or baby, in the single at the time. And that person is Anna Lewis, and there's a video of Anna Lewis posted on my website, drmarysmonkey.com, but spell out doctor. Just go into the main page of the website, and you're looking for the witness to the witness, and there's a big, long video of Judith Ferry Baker there, too. So all this, there's about 15 hours of videos on my website, but the critical ones that relate to the story are the ones I just pointed out to, because they're eyewitnesses who were there, and were in face-to-face daily contact with Lee Oswald. You still with me, Ed?
Yeah, I am. You know what I want to ask you? Okay, like when you, before you wrote the first book, okay, the self-published book, you must have realized you were getting into a whole new way of life and opening up a whole giant can of worms.
Right.
Yeah. Now, that was a reflective moment in your life.
Yeah, you have to get to a go, no-go decision there.
Yeah, so how'd that come about?
Well, when I realized the contamination of the polio vaccine, and then I found the evidence from NCI about the epidemic erupting after the polio vaccine, I realized the dimensions of the problem.
Right.
And I just said, I wasn't at Iwo Jima. I didn't go to Vietnam. This is what I need to do for my country, is bring this story forward. And, I may get killed doing it, but a lot of other people have gotten killed doing what they needed to do. So I just decided to push the button and do it. And I was very careful. I've always been careful about how I handle myself in public and in my own private spaces. And I have been and I was very sort of slow when I started out, but the people, like Jim Mars wrote the foreword to my book, so it took the JFK assassination research community a while to figure out who I was. When they did, they realized I had not fallen off the watermelon truck. I was not nuts. I had tons of evidence to support what I was saying. And then we get Judy Very, who's now married, named Judith Very Baker. She comes to New Orleans, and she's working with Mary Sherman. And Lee Oswald is part of the operation, and it's being run out of David Ferry's apartment. So what's happening is they have set up this little circle of laboratories in uptown New Orleans. They take mice, right, and they inject them with this.
Now, these laboratories were run out of apartments or offices? What?
Safe houses.
Homes, apartments.
Yeah, safe houses, right? David Ferry's apartment, and there was a house across the street. And this is explained in my book, but my girlfriend actually rented this apartment at one point in time.
Right.
And that was the mouse house. That was where they had the 5,000 mice in cages. Or 2,000 or whatever the number was. Thousands of mice, right? But they were in cages in this mouse house, which was very close to David Ferry's apartment. There were these two Cuban kids, guys in their young 20s, early 20s, that lived upstairs, and they would go down and select the mice with the biggest tumors. You can see a mouse has tumors as big as the mouse, and take a number of these, like 50 of them, and put them in a big cardboard box, and they'd walk them over to David Ferry's apartment, come up the back street, come up the back stairs, and when Judy and Lee would get there, they would use formalin or formaldehyde, and they would kill the mice. They would dissect them. They would cut out the tumors. They would put the tumors in a blender. They'd make a puree out of the tumors. They'd filter out the biomass, so you've got liquid left. They'd put that into test tubes. Judy would label all the test tubes, make microscopic slides, put everything into a lunchbox, clean up the David Ferry's kitchen to laboratory standards, hide all the equipment, and then Judy would take the lunchbox, go get on the Louisiana Avenue bus, take it up to St. Charles Avenue where Mary Sherman lived. She had a key to Mary Sherman's apartment. She'd let herself in, sit there and read and wait for Mary Sherman to come home and talk to her about the experiments. And when they needed something done, they needed something, errand run or something. I mean, for example, they ran out of fetal calf serum that they needed to grow the cancer on, and they didn't want Judy going over to the place asking for fetal calf serum, so they sent Lee over because he was just sort of could act like an errand boy and didn't know anything. So what they're doing is after they cut out these tumors, and they're looking for the big aggressive tumors that'll kill quickly, and they send it back to Mary Sherman, and she looks at them under her special high-powered microscope. Then she sends them back to the linear particle accelerator over at the U.S. Public Health Service for another dose of radiation to ramp them up to the next level. And so the cancer viruses they're working with each round keep getting more and more powerful, and that's and Oshner starts saying we need faster results, kill more mice, blah, blah, blah. Let's start using it on monkeys and all that stuff. And they get into August of 1963. What's interesting, on July 26th, Lee Oswald goes and speaks at a conference over in Mobile, Alabama, organized by the Jesuits on the Soviet Union. Well, he comes back from that conference, and on July 29th, he tells Judy, he says, look, Judy, they're asking me to do all this stuff in August to make me look like a communist. He said, they're telling me they're doing this so I can get into Cuba, but I think they're going to kill Castro. Kill Kennedy, and they're setting me up to take the blame. So Judy gets told this on July 29th. So in August, we have all this stuff going on with the so-called street fight with Carlos Bernier on August 9th. That's the day Judy gets fired because she gets seen with Lee that day. Lee's already been fired. August 16th, Lee's out in front of the International Trade Mart handing out leaflets, and then we come to the end of August. They have decided to test the biological weapon on a patient up in Jackson, Louisiana, at this mental hospital. Well, the biggest mental hospital in Louisiana at the time is actually in Mandeville, just outside New Orleans. To get to Jackson, you have to drive 3.5, 4 hours one way to get there, and 3.5, 4 hours back, and you got a couple hours of stuff to do there. So this is not a casual trip. This is something that is very deliberate and very planned. And this is a hospital for the criminally insane. So there's a lot of security around this thing. There's armed guards at the gates and stuff like that. They're checking everybody in and out. And so they've got to figure out how to get the biological weapon into the hospital so that they can inject it into this guy who's been pulled off a death row as a, quote, volunteer for this experiment. So what they decide to do is they have a friend of Lee Oswald and David Ferry, who's got access to this big black Cadillac, drive them up to Jackson, Louisiana. And then what they're going to do is they're going to wait for this van to come from Angola Penitentiary. And when it comes down the highway, they're going to get in line behind the van. So you get this van shows up at this mental hospital and says, Louisiana Department of Corrections and all this stuff. And it's got guys in uniforms driving and all this stuff. And they got this big black Cadillac behind it. And they got an employee from the thing in there, and they wave them all in together. And But the only problem is they've got to coordinate this. And Jackson is this little tiny town, so they don't want to wait in Jackson. So they drive down the